Hey, welcome to Andrew's Things. This quick tip is about setting up Blender files to be composited in After Effects. Full disclosure, I'm not an expert at this. Three main categories to understand are diffuse, glossy, and transmission. Diffuse is the general color of the material when light shines on it. Glossy is the reflective stuff, and transmission is the see-through stuff. You can see how they combine together again in this chart. In Blender, check if you can turn Optix on in the settings, which will help you render your files a little bit faster. It might be limited to certain GPUs though. I'll be denoising in the compositor so my samples don't have to be crazy high. I've set it to 128 in the render properties. Go into the layer properties to select what you need. I'll need the denoising data too. I'll be using the cycles renderer for this animation. Click F12 here to render a single image. Once set to the composite, you should be able to change it to view layers and browse through the passes and get a general sense of what they do. Note that in the diffuse passes, the direct and indirect have a lot of noise, whereas the diffuse color pass doesn't. So I won't need to apply the denoise on the color pass. To use the AI denoise, go to the Compositing tab. Excuse the mess. If you have Node Wrangler enabled in your add-ons, you can Control-Shift-Click on the node to see it through the viewer. Hold Shift-A to add, and you can search for a new node. So all you really need is your rendered layers and a filed output node. Press N on your keyboard to see the properties of the node. My little animation is only a 5-second test animation, so I'll set it to multi-layer EXR and set it to half float, which I think is 16-bit. Let's add all the passes that we're wanting to render. For now, I want the image, shadow, ambient occlusion, diffuse direct, diffuse indirect, diffuse color, gloss direct, gloss indirect, gloss color, transmission direct, transmission indirect, and transmission color. Let's set up the diffuse passes as an example. Connect the diffuse direct into the output node and press Shift A and S for search and find the denoise node. Drop it on the line to plug it in. And we'll connect the denoising data, which is the denoising albedo and denoising normal into the node. Control-Shift-Click to link the viewer node to it. You can click on the backdrop button to see what the viewer node is looking at. Hot tip, highlight the viewer node and press V to zoom out and Alt-V to zoom in. It's not very intuitive, but it is what it is. If you want a window on the side like I do, you can always put your cursor on the corner of your existing window and drag out another. Change the editor type to image editor and change this tab to browse through the viewer node. If I zoom in on this pill shape and mute the denoise node, you can see how much of a difference it makes. If I plug and unplug the denoising data, you can see how it helps keep the detail in the texture. Let's duplicate this denoising node and plug the diffused indirect into the input and change its respective output. Let's not forget the denoising data. Control-Shift-Click to see it again. Remember that the color layers didn't need any denoising, so we can plug it straight into the output. For housekeeping, let's add a frame in the Layouts tab, and we can select everything we've done and drag it into the frame. Let's click on it, press N to see the options, and give it the label diff. Now let's do the same for the glossy passes. Let's highlight our nodes, Shift D to duplicate. I'll label the frame gloss. Plug the glossy direct into the first denoise node and find its output. Plug the glossy indirect into the second and find its output. Plug the glossy color straight into the output node. I'm going to do the exact same thing for transmission passes. Let's also do the exact same for the shadows and ambient occlusion. Once that's all set up, make sure your file output path is going to exactly where you want it to go. I've done the AI denoise on the transmission pass, and it goes ham since I can't really figure out what's happening inside of a mesh, and that's something I still have to figure out. Last I checked, Cryptomatte doesn't work through the output node, and it also doesn't fully work with half float. With Blender 2.92 though, you can render it through Eevee, so we can do that after. While I'm rendering through Blender's compositor, Blender still wants to render through its usual output properties. To save space and not get double ups of the non-denoise version, I'm just going to set this to render out JPEGs. Make sure it's pointing to a different location than where your output node in the compositor is looking to. Render the animation in the Renders tab or Ctrl plus F12. When that's all done, we can change our renderer to Eevee, and let's select only the Cryptomatte in the Layer Properties tab. Choose Multi-Layer EXR, Full Float, and select where you like to render the Cryptomattes. Check on part 2 of the After Effects side of things. I'll see you soon.